Welcome to Wine Soundtrack South Africa. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Morena Kalo, and today I am sitting with Edmund Itle from Upland Organic Wines. Welcome, Edmund. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. We came to the farm in 1990, so I've been here 32 years. I'm a vet by training, and I just decided that 10 years in my profession was enough, and it was time for a change. So first I had to learn how to farm, which wasn't quite so easy, as one might imagine, and then after that I decided it's better to start adding some value to the products, and so started making wine and started making brandy. And gradually moved over into an organic system, and we can talk about that if you're keen. So from my veterinary background, I was able to see that the things that I was taught about how one should farm didn't match with my understanding of how diseases and hosts interact. The difference, obviously, is that I was taught about animals, and now I'm dealing with plants, but the principles remain very much the same. And so I started looking at alternatives, and in the beginning, of course, there was no Google, and there was no guidelines, and you had to read books and write letters and wait for weeks to get answers. But eventually I started forming an idea as to a sort of a basic type of organic agriculture, and then slowly over the years fleshed this out, and it became apparent to me that this was the right thing to do, because when we first arrived here, the farm was pretty denuded of everything except grapevines. And now there's not a square inch of soil which doesn't have something growing on it, except the roads, obviously. And so it became clear that the first thing to do was to look after the soil. After that, look after the plants. It becomes much easier. And we've never looked back. So initially we didn't bother with certification because in the 1990s, organic had quite a bad reputation. So people thought it was somehow not quite so good, or didn't taste so good, or it was a bit quirky. Of course, nowadays people have realized that actually the quality is fine. It's excellent. So later on I got certified because I was exporting, and so we probably were the first organic winery in the country.
Super, that's really great. And still to this day, there aren't that many certified organic wineries in South Africa, which it's slowly changing. And as I think the demand is growing for organic wine, but to be one of the front runners in that game, I think has certainly been beneficial, I'm quite sure. Tell me, where is Upland Organic located?
We're in Wellington, and we're above the town. We're about at least 100 meters above the town. And the name comes from the fact, firstly, that we're in a high area, but it's also the direct translation of this area from Afrikaans to English, the Boland being the upland. And so it's from that we chose the name.
The views are absolutely spectacular coming up here when I was looking out the car window. Tell me, how many acres of land do you farm under vine for winemaking?
Well, the whole farm is 46 hectares, but we don't farm that all under vines. Obviously, it's an organic farm, so it's not monoculture. We have a lot of other varieties as well, some citrus, some fruits which we dry. We've got nuts, we've got olives and olive oil. The vines themselves, it's about 5 hectares that we have, which is split roughly 50-50 between red and white.
And what varietals or varieties have you got planted, shall I say?
The whites are Chenin Blanc and Colombard, and the reds are Cabernet Sauvignon and a little soupçon of Pinot Noir.
Interesting stuff, actually. Tell me your sales, wine sales. What do you sell locally, and what do you export, and to which markets do those wines go?
Most of the sales are local. There's a small amount, I would guess maybe 5 or 10% that gets exported, primarily to Germany and a little bit to the Netherlands and to Belgium. The export sales, of course, are great because it's a pallet at a time, whereas the local sales are a box or a bottle at a time. So one tends to think of the local sales as being a lot more because there's just so many more physical sales going through. But in fact, the volumes are probably quite substantial in the export.
And you mentioned earlier that you were a vet before turning your skills to farming and winemaking. Were you, as a child, someone who was more interested in animals? Was becoming a vet kind of one of those things you wanted to be, or what did you want to be when you were a little boy?
Well, we always had animals around us, dogs. I grew up in Johannesburg, so it was in the suburbs. There was limited space. One could only have a certain amount of things, but ducks and geese and dogs and that sort of thing we were able to keep. And then from then, I've always had an interest in animals, and then decided that it's probably the best route to go because veterinary science is a very broad field. It's not just fixing dogs and cats, and I still practice part-time, so I've kept my hand in over all these years.
So you were a veterinary surgeon before. What changed for you to take on the world of farming? And specifically, I'd like to know whether there was a seminal moment that made you turn to wine. Was it something you tasted? How did it happen?
Well, when we came here, the farm was contracted to the cooperative to supply them with grapes. And that was fine in the beginning when I was still learning how to farm conventionally. But when I changed over to the organic, I went to the management there and asked them if they were interested in paying a premium for organic grapes. And they said no, which made it clear to me that I needed to add the value myself. And there's only really one way of doing that, and that's to make the wine. So I had to start doing that. And then, of course, the next thing was what to do with the white grapes. The red grapes to make wine is quite easy. It gains in its value the longer you keep it, obviously up to a point, but so your marketing doesn't have to be up to scratch. Whereas the white wine, if you don't sell it this year, next year it's worth half, and the year after you can't even give it away. So I had to add some value to the white, which was different, and that's why I started distilling the white. And once again, you get a product, the brandy, which just gets more and more valuable with age, and so you're not under pressure to market. The other thing was, of course, that there was a lot of alcohol abuse in this valley, and as a result of that, I didn't really want to be in the bulk, cheap white wine market at all. I somehow thought that if the wine is expensive, it's less likely to be abused. And once again, with the brandy, it's not a cheap product, it's an expensive product.
Yeah, for sure. I think it does make a difference. And I think the stories we tell, but the narrative of changing the average South African's attitude towards alcohol use is so important for our whole industry, and we all need to stand together and tell the same story. I must say, I'm loving hearing the rooster in the background. That's how you know you really are on a farm. So have you traveled abroad much, visited other vineyards in other regions of our wine-producing world?
Yes, indeed. Every time I travel, I specifically go to the wineries to see what they're up to. We did that in Chile. And then I took the whole family when the children were younger on a cycling trip in France. And we managed to get through a substantial number of different wines. Each place that we cycled to were new vineyards and it was in Provence. And it's a lovely place to do that. And we briefly popped into some vineyards in Spain as well.
And have you tried any outstanding international wines that really have left a mark on your memory?
Well, to answer that, I think I'll say that my favorite wine is the one that's in my glass at the moment. So every wine is unique in its own way, and each one has its own charms and its own restraints. So while I have had some pretty terrible wines, on the whole, most of the wines that I've had have been delicious.
I suppose one has to take the good with the bad, as they say. So tell me about your wines, your range of wines. What is the most expensive bottle in your range?
Well, it's a brandy, actually, not a wine. It's for 8,000 Rand for a bottle. It's a blend of 15 to 18-year-old. It's the only organic distillery and brandy in the country. So that's the most expensive one. The wines, I tend to keep all the prices the same because I'm not very good at remembering things. So I pitched all of the prices at roughly 160 Rand. For the MCC, which is a Méthode Ancestrale bubbly, and then the Cabernet and the Pinot Noir.
I like that angle. It certainly keeps it simple. You'll always remember what the price of your wines are. Which wine in your cellar gives you the most satisfaction? I know they say you can't ask a parent who their favorite child is, but if there's one that kind of it just gives you joy every time you either work with it or you drink it in the glass, which one would that be?
That's a really, really difficult question to answer because every single product that I make, I'm proud of. And we do a wide range. We've got, apart from the ones that I've mentioned, we also do ports. The one port that I made won Best Port in South Africa last year. So that one, obviously, I'm especially proud of. But then we do a range of liqueurs. We do some white spirits, a grappa, a rakia, 2 liqueurs, a limoncello, and a Jahrabend or Jägermeister digestive. Everyone is good in its own right. So obviously you can't keep everybody happy by saying that everybody's going to like everything. But if you like a grappa, you will like mine. And if you like a brandy, you will like mine. So I work on a very simple principle. If it doesn't pass my test, I won't put my label on it. With the wines, it's quite easy because if something goes wrong with the wines, and it does fairly regularly for the simple reason that I'm making all my wines are sulfite-free. Now, it's one thing being organic, it's another thing making a red wine that lasts for 10 years without any sulfites and without any other preservatives that have been put in. Every now and again, things don't work out exactly the way that I'd hoped. And then it's quite straightforward. It's you distill it and you solve your problem. So every season, every year has its own challenges. But I just have, it's like cooking. Every dish that you make will be a little bit different. But in the end of the day, the pleasure that you give people from a good meal or a good glass of wine amply makes up for the effort required to make it.
Speaking about food, obviously people are very much into food and wine pairing. Do you think there's a distinct recipe in terms of pairing red wine with red meat and white wine with white meat, or can you shake it up a bit?
Well, I always shake it up. In fact, it's one of the privileges of being the winemaker is that you're allowed to do all sorts of things that everybody else would frown upon. So I have no compunction whatsoever of mixing some of my whites with some of my reds or putting in a splash of port if I feel like something that's slightly sweeter. Anything goes.
That's awesome. Tell me, what is your opinion on wine critics, scores, competitions?
Well, obviously, one needs these things for the marketing of them, and I recognize that the public is very much influenced by the results of these things. My personal opinion is that all the tastings should be blind, because cited tastings, it's been shown many times, are biased. The other thing that bothers me is that many of the judges have specific flavor preferences. And so if your wine doesn't fit into their flavor preference, you don't get the nod. And these are the risks that are involved. But as the French say, chacun a son goût, you can't keep everybody happy. Everyone will have their own preference. And I'm sure that there will be people that really love my wines, whether or not they score 5 stars or not. I have had 5-star wines. So, it's not that my wines are not scoring on the charts, but they don't all get high marks. So it's really your personal preference, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, fair enough. I think especially if it's a one-person panel and, then it becomes very subjective. So when you buy wine, other than your own, obviously, that you enjoy, what do you normally go for? White, red, rosé, some bubbles?
I usually go for the whites for the simple reason that I only make a white bubbly. I don't make a still white. And so I'm quite keen on just having a little bit more variety. But that's generally what I would choose.
And have you ever had too many glasses of wine and maybe had a bit of a hangover the next day? Judging your smile, I think you have. In which case, I'm going to ask you, have you got a hangover cure?
Well, yes, indeed. And that is sulfite-free organic white. Because rule number 1, no headaches. I occasionally have to drink other people's wine, firstly out of curiosity, and secondly that I need to know what's going on in the industry. And generally, I know the next day when I've had conventional wines, whether or not it's because of the conventional farming or whether it's because of the sulfites that are in there, I don't know. But I know that I can feel it the next day. Whereas every morning that I wake up having drunk my wines, I don't feel bad at all. So, yeah.
I think I need to start changing over to sulfite-free wines, definitely. So, Edmund, there was a freaky event and a bunch of space aliens landed on Upland Organic Wine Estate, and they parched. What do you give them to drink?
I'd definitely start with the bubbles. You can't go wrong with bubbles. It doesn't matter. As Napoleon said, in victory you deserve it, in defeat you need it. So it doesn't matter what the time of the day, bubbles are fine. I've yet to find people that don't like it.
I certainly love bubbles, for sure. So we know each vintage tells its own story. But would you say there are more things that repeat themselves or not? I suppose organic farming, you really are giving yourself over to nature. What is your experience in that regard?
Well, what I've had to do is, because of the fact that each year is not going to be the same size, let alone the same quality. Some years are just big years and some years are small years. And so when you're making sulfite-free wines, it's very difficult with a small volume. You do need a large volume for it to work. And so in the years where the vintages are thin, I make port instead. And port is a great way of taking care of a small amount of grapes, for the simple reason that the alcohol is doing the preserving. And so it's, you don't have to be that careful with what you're doing. But for the rest of it, it's the problems that we have here are baboons and the antelope, the bokkies, that come and eat the grapes, and particularly in the reds that are on the higher reaches of the farm. What happens is that we have to leave them to ripen, and the longer you leave them, the fewer of them are there. And we're getting to the stage where there's a certain vineyard where we just have to virtually ride it off to the antelope and to the baboons. And hope that we get something from the lower vineyards.
That is such a pity, but as I say, I suppose sharing is caring, hey? Do you have any good luck rituals that you kind of abide to as harvest begins?
No, I don't have any good luck rituals, but I certainly have plenty of rituals. Number one, I love my siesta. It's kind of holy ground. Just leave me alone after my lunch and I'm going to go and have a sleep for half an hour, just a cat nap. That's one of my rituals that I really enjoy. And of course, a nice cup of coffee in the mornings.
I have the same. I can do an afternoon nap at any time. It's one of my treats. If you really want to make me happy, then give me just a half an hour little snoozy. Many producers walk through their vineyards or through their cellars and claim to speak to their grapes or the wines in the cellar maturing. Do you chat to them? And if so, what do you say?
No, I don't talk to my wines at all. I do like to play music when I've got the staff bottling, but that's to keep them happy, not because I have any ideas that it influences the product at all.
Okay, and when you're not working, what do you do in your free time?
I enjoy listening to music and I enjoy reading books and, of course, going for a walk on the farm. That might be seen as work, but it's still a lovely farm to walk on.
Yeah, I bet, especially if you go higher up, those views must be really even more spectacular than what I saw earlier. You enjoy music, so who are your favorite bands or artists? What genre do you enjoy listening to?
Mostly Baroque. Bach is best. It doesn't matter what time of the day or night. He will always lift my mood.
Oh wow, that's awesome! And you can always play them to your vineyards. I believe there's scientific evidence that shows if you play classical music to your vines, they grow healthier or more. Yeah, they flourish. That's the word we're looking for. Do you have an all-time favorite movie that you enjoy watching, or one that really just makes you feel some strong memories or emotions?
Well, quite a few of them, of course. The Mission was one that really stood out in my mind, with those beautiful views of the Iguazu Falls, and also to see the indigenous people. Zorba the Greek, of course, was a great movie with Anthony Quinn, black and white, 1950s. If I'm looking for something lighter, I'll go for the Marx Brothers, also black and white movies from whenever. Yeah.
One of those. If you were to go out for a romantic dinner somewhere nice, what wine would you generally order, or what would you look out for on the wine list?
I'm quite partial to a very dry Sauvignon Blanc, which I don't make, and so especially if I'm going out to have some fish or seafood or something like that, that's really what I would choose.
Tell me, what is the best advice you were ever given?
Listen to advice.
And if you were to share a piece of advice with our listeners, what would it be?
Well, just that. When I came here, I didn't know anything about farming whatsoever, and so I had to go to experts and ask them how to do things. And I followed their advice, and it worked. It really does work. So my advice is, go to the people that you respect in the industry, whatever it is that you're wanting to know. Go to the best person that you feel is able to tell you, and follow that advice. And I must say, the South African wine industry was very open and very helpful to me. They didn't keep their cards close to their chest. They told me their secrets. And it was very refreshing to be in that industry from that perspective.
I think that inclusivity certainly is something that shines through for me in our industry, that people are willing to help each other out, who are just genuinely seeking advice. It's not that I'm going to steal your ideas or your recipes. So that's really great. Complete the sentence. A table without wine is like.
An unfinished painting.
An unfinished painting. Very good. What is your proudest achievement at work, Edmund?
It doesn't actually have anything to do with the winery, so perhaps let's think about my proudest achievement with the winery, and that is winning Best Port in the John Platter Guide.
Tell me, what wines do you think will be drunk in about 2,000 years' time?
Phew, I really have no idea, but I guess it'll be quite different from what we're drinking now.
I can only imagine. It makes you wonder what wines were like 2,000 years ago. You know, and they were making wine. It's what do you think?
Well, I think this is exactly what I've tried to do in the cellar, and that is to recreate the way that wines were made originally. In other words, without the use of sulfites and without the use of animal products, gelatine or egg white or fish extracts, which are commonly used in the industry. So I wanted to try and recreate a wine which was as close as possible as the wines that were made before these additives became commonplace.
Yeah. Tell me, if you were stuck in the middle of the bush and you could only have, in the perfect world, only had 3 wines with you, what would those 3 wines be?
Well, one of them would definitely be a brandy. And the other would be a Cabernet, and the third would be the bubbles.
Yes, I think the brandy will last a little bit longer, and it can certainly keep you warm on the cold nights. Yes. What is a winemaking? You mentioned that you explored quite a few winemaking regions, but which one, or even a few, haven't you explored yet that are very much on your bucket list?
Well, I've never been to Australia, and that I would like to go. And of course, New Zealand's just next door to that, and they make some splendid wines there as well. The other thing, which is for me a curiosity, is to go and see what the English are doing, because in Roman times they used to make wine there, and now they're making it again, probably with a little bit of the warming of the Earth's climate, and also with people understanding how to manage cold climate vineyards. So those are 2 places that I'd really like to still see. Germany as well, they have some very fine whites.
Some interesting areas, that's for sure. And as someone that enjoys a Sauvignon Blanc, I think New Zealand is a must-stop. Yes, for sure. We're almost wrapping up here, but before I do, I'd like to play a little game. I'm going to name 3 varieties, and you need to pair each variety with a song. So I am going to go with a Colombard, a Sauvignon Blanc, and a Merlot.
With a song?
With a song.
Well, it would have been much easier if you'd said rosé, then I would have said bluegrass, or a Pinot Noir, in which case I would have said Mozart. And of course Beethoven will go with brandy. But those 3, I'm afraid I don't know.
I think you gave me 3 great examples, though, that certainly work very, very well. Edmund, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to remind our listeners where they could potentially find your wines, how they can come and visit, and please tell them where to look you up on the internet?
It's Upland Organic Estates, so you'll be able to find that if you just put that in the search engine. The website is organicwine.co.za. That's one word with no S at the end, just organicwine.co.za. The best is to just take my phone number as well, 082 731 4774. We do tastings and tours by appointment. You can just rock up if you feel like, unannounced, and take your chances. But as I'm the sole winemaker and farmer, and you may or may not find me here without an appointment.
Chief cook and bottle washer, as they say. Edmund, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure chatting to you, and I hope to speak to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack South Africa. For details and updates, visit our website winesoundtrack.com.